He didn't look like a man who would burn the world. Charles Darwin was soft, not weak, soft. Quiet voice, nervous laugh, pockets full of dead beetles. As a boy, he hated conflict and loved patterns. While other kids scraped knees, he catalogued worms. His nickname at school? Gas. Because he was invisible, gentle, easy to ignore. He wanted to be a priest. He genuinely did. Not out of fire, out of comfort. God made the world. The world made sense, and Darwin wanted in on that. A system, a shepherd, a reason. As a student, he couldn't handle the blood in the surgery theater. He fainted, literally, crumpled to the floor like a collapsing theory. So he turned to plants, stones, insects, things that didn't scream. Collecting became his religion. He pinned butterflies like trophies of certainty, as if, by naming everything, he could keep the chaos outside the door. But then came the beagle. He thought it would be 5 years of adventure. Drawings, specimens, sea air, the voice of God. Every leaf. Instead, the ship nearly killed him. The nausea hit before land even disappeared. Violent, endless retching. Days curled in a hammock, skin pale as wax, muscles twitching. His body wanted off the boat more than his mind could explain. And that was just the beginning. The journey pulled him into raw nature, not painted landscapes, real nature, unedited, blood-stained. He saw the tropics, yes, but not Eden. He saw howler monkeys tear into infants. He watched a fox gnaw its own paw off to escape a trap. A tortoise flipped on its back, dying slowly under the sun, while the others stepped over it like furniture. He took notes, but he also flinched, because something started to twist, a discomfort too big for his journals. He wasn't observing God's architecture. He was watching a roulette table where life bet with teeth. One night in the Galapagos, he found himself staring at 2 finches fighting over a seed. One drove its beak through the other's eye. It wasn't fast. The bird shrieked and spasmed in the dust. He didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid of violence, but because deep down he realized this wasn't evil. This was normal. No lesson, no morality, just pressure. No divine justice, just pattern recognition. Darwin began noticing variations where there should have been design. Beaks, shells, colors. Time zones changed anatomy. Geography mutated instinct. No island was the same, and neither were its creatures. His childhood image of nature, gentle, green, sacred, shattered. He didn't cry. He wrote. But each page was heavier than the last. His observations started to feel like confessions. He wasn't sure if he was discovering a theory or committing blasphemy. He missed England, missed Emma, missed the silence of not knowing. And that's when it happened. A single simple thought, one that no priest had ever whispered, one that no cathedral would dare carve into stained glass. What if nothing was designed? What if life wasn't created? What if it just survived? Something inside him split. He still dressed like a gentleman, still shook hands, still smiled. But inside, the blade had formed. A mental scalpel, sharpened not by ambition, but by 5 years of watching the indifferent churn of existence. A tool, cold and surgical. And on the edge of that knife, he had carved a phrase that changed the world. Natural selection. He didn't speak it out loud. He wasn't ready. Because deep down, he knew exactly what would happen if he ever pulled that blade from its sheath. It wouldn't just cut through science. It would cut through everything. Before Darwin, the world made sense. A deep, soothing, ornamental kind of sense. The kind that tucked you in at night and kissed your forehead with scripture. The earth was a stage. Man, the star. Everything else? Props, set dressing. God was playwright, director, lighting crew. Life had a plot, a climax, a moral. In the halls of Cambridge, students sat beneath stained glass and took notes on divine mechanics. A professor would point to a femur and call it proof of perfect engineering. The curve of a rib, divine symmetry, the human eye, too beautiful not to be designed. Every anatomical detail was explained with reverence. Purpose was assigned like grades. Function meant intention, and intention meant love. It wasn't science versus faith. It was science serving faith, like an obedient apprentice. Faith gave the why. Science provided the flair. Popular books sold in London stalls declared nature a moral mirror. One bestseller called Birdsong a reminder of innocence. Another claimed earthquakes were God's broom, cleaning sin. Even textbooks leaned soft, labeling extinction as God's first drafts, revised for virtue. And people loved it. Because this version of the world didn't just make sense, it gave comfort. It promised you were here on purpose, that your pain meant something, that your suffering had a handler, a reason, a clock behind the chaos, that lions roared to teach courage, that bees danced because harmony was beautiful, that death wasn't an end, just a lesson. The map of existence was rich and flattering, man at the top, angels watching overhead, hell beneath, yes, but only for those who truly deserved it. So when Darwin returned, sunburnt and silent, with sketches of dead finches and equations in his margins, people didn't panic. They smiled. They poured tea. They assumed he'd seen what they always saw, God's fingerprints on fossils, divine rhythm in waves and wings. They didn't realize he'd measured the rhythm, and it didn't loop. It too spiraled, into violence, into waste, into change with no goal, but more change. Darwin didn't shout, didn't rage, didn't throw fire at the altar. He just watched, compared skulls, counted eggs, mapped patterns. And when he stared long enough, something terrifying emerged. It all worked, but not because anyone wanted it to. Nature wasn't love. It was iteration. It was trial. And mostly, it was error. The beauty was real. The balance was real. But it had been hammered into place, not painted. There was no hand steadying the wheel. Just physics, teeth, time. Darwin realized the script wasn't written. It was improvised, and the cast didn't even know they were performing. He came back to a world still humming hymns, still baptizing babies, still clinging to bedtime stories with gold edges and soft landings, still pointing at butterflies and whispering, "See? Proof that God is gentle." But in the back of the room now sat a man with salt in his lungs and silence in his hands. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't angry. He was dislocated. He had seen under the skin of paradise, and he couldn't unsee it. The Galapagos looked like hell with feathers, blistering heat, salt-bleached rock, wind that sliced your ears open. The place didn't feel sacred. It felt forgotten. Like a chunk of earth even God didn't finish. But Darwin couldn't stop watching. It started with a bird, then another, then dozens. Finches. They should have been identical. They were the same species, right? But they weren't. Not up close. One had a beak like a hammer, another thin as a needle. One bird crunched seeds like bones, another plucked insects out of bark with surgical precision. Same basic body, different weapons. He didn't smile. He didn't marvel. He squinted. And then he noticed something worse. Some of them were starving, not from laziness, not from weakness, just from being slightly wrong for that patch of dirt. On a different island, they would have ruled. Here they were dying. He wrote in his notebook, "Why should creatures vary thus by geography?" Then he crossed it out. No, not vary. Adapt? That word felt dangerous, like he wasn't observing anymore, like he was accusing. He kept going. Tortoises with high necks, stretching for dry leaves. ones with saddle-shaped shells to climb over each other for food. On wetter islands, round shells. Short legs. No need to reach. Food fell at their feet. Even the lizards. Marine iguanas with flat noses to suck algae off rocks. Their cousins inland. Sharp-snouted, land-bound. Eating bugs and basking in shade. He was surrounded by shapeshifters. Not mythical. Not magical. Just desperate. One morning, he watched a nest of baby birds crack open. 2 chicks emerged. The bigger one opened its beak wide for food. The second didn't. The first chick stabbed it in the face. No hesitation. Tiny beak like a needle. Again. Again. Until the smaller bird stopped moving. Darwin froze. He'd seen death, but not this kind. Not strategic death. Not infants murdering each other before their feathers dried. He stepped back. Almost dropped his notebook. Wrote 1 sentence that night, by lantern light. This is not cruelty. This is algorithm. He didn't sleep, because the thought that followed hit like a punch to the spine. Maybe it's always been this way. He had grown up in a world where God tested character. Now he was watching a system that tested nothing. Just pushed, just filtered, just erased the slow. That was the first real crack in the floor. It wasn't evil. It wasn't even emotional. That's what made it worse. There was no villain here. Just the weight of time pressing down on everything that lived, seeing who'd break first. It didn't matter how noble you were, how kind. It mattered how sharp your beak was, how well you blended in, how fast you adjusted. And suddenly, beauty, real breathtaking beauty, looked different. It wasn't harmony. It was scar tissue. He wrote again. I begin to fear that I see not design, but selection. The world was not a painting. It was a battlefield wearing a flower crown. No one had planned this. There was no conductor, only pressure, only loss, and whatever was left after. And Darwin, he stood in the middle of it all, sweating, shaking, recording, not because he wanted to, but because something inside him was uncoiling, whispering, if this is true, you'll never be able to go back. He looked around. Birds screamed in the trees. Lizards hissed underfoot. The wind dragged salt across his teeth. The machine didn't even notice he was there. And that's what broke him. He came home thinner, not in body, in presence. The voyage hadn't just aged him. It had extracted something warm, something trusting. The man who stepped off the Beagle looked the same, smiled the same, but his eyes had seen something the world wasn't ready for. And neither was he. He married Emma, his cousin, yes, but more than that, his anchor. She was gentle, devout, the kind of person who lit candles for strangers. Their house in Down was a portrait of quiet England. Ivy on the walls, garden benches, children's laughter through open windows. Neighbors saw a scholar, a family man. They didn't see the war in his study. Darwin had the idea. Not a theory, not a what if. A full, sharpened thought. That life, all of it, didn't require God. Just time, death, error, and it terrified him. He didn't publish, he didn't whisper. He locked it inside notebooks, coded in diagrams and cautious language. He'd stare at a sentence for hours. Write, cross out, rewrite. There were pages with more eraser than ink, as if admitting it would set the paper on fire. Because it wasn't just scientific, it was personal. If this was true, then everything they'd built, society, morality, marriage, Emma's faith, was built on sand. Emma would sit across from him some evenings, reading quietly. She'd glance up. Are you all right? He'd nod, smile, lie. Once after supper, she asked, Do you think suffering ever has a purpose? He hesitated, then said, Maybe the purpose is just to continue. She didn't ask again. His health began to fail, slowly at first, then violently, a twisting in his gut that left him doubled over, pale, gasping. The doctors called it nerves, digestion, exhaustion. They didn't have words for what he was. A man holding radioactive truth in his chest and praying it wouldn't break loose. He took long walks alone, avoided cities, avoided arguments, especially with Emma. She prayed each night. He listened, silent. She prayed for his mind, his soul, his peace. He never interrupted, but he never joined in. And then came the worst. Annie, 10 years old, hair like fire. She danced when no one watched, hugged strangers, asked endless questions. She was to Darwin the last flicker of innocence that he hadn't managed to kill. And when she fell ill, he watched her fade with the same precision he once used to study turtles. He sat by her bed for days, waiting, hoping for divine interruption. Nothing came. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. The funeral was simple, small, rain. No hymns, no music, just dirt and silence. He stood by the grave. Emma's hand clutched his, trembling. His face was blank, but inside something broke so quietly it didn't even echo. So she just didn't adapt. That thought slithered through his mind. She didn't fit. She lost the game. That's all? He didn't say it out loud, but he didn't pray either. Not out of rage, not rebellion, out of vacancy. The forest had stopped answering. He never went to church again. Emma never asked why. She knew, but they didn't talk about it. That was the real fracture. Not anger, but distance. A slow, unbearable drifting between two people who loved each other, but no longer lived in the same universe. At night, he dreamed of monsters, not the ones from stories, the ones from his sketches, beaks twisting wrong, wings folding backwards, creatures with no eyes, just mouths, things that looked almost right, almost alive. He'd wake up shaking, soaked, breathing hard like he'd been running for days. Sometimes he vomited before sunrise. The truth inside him was growing fangs. It was no longer content with notebooks. It wanted oxygen. And still, he waited. Not because he feared being wrong, but because he feared what would happen if he was right. Because if natural selection was real, if adaptation was the only God, then everything beautiful, everything sacred, everything they used to kneel for, was just scaffolding. And people were just accidents that didn't die yet. He sat in his study, watching his children play in the garden, watching Emma weep when she thought no one could see. And the question he never said out loud circled him like a vulture. If I speak this, will the world ever feel safe again? It was just a letter, slim, unassuming, postmarked from the Malay archipelago, June 1858. Charles Darwin slit it open with the casual motion of a man expecting nothing. He unfolded the paper, read, stopped, read again. And then he sat very still, as if movement might break something delicate in the air. Wallace, Alfred Russel Wallace, young, ambitious, half a world away. A man Darwin barely knew. And inside that envelope was everything. Natural selection, variation, inheritance, pressure, change, worded differently, less data, less weight. But the bones were there, the core, the blade. Darwin's hands trembled, not with rage, not even with fear, with recognition. Someone else had seen it, without the beagle, without the vomiting, without Annie's grave. It felt like watching a ghost mouth your secrets. He dropped the letter on the desk, backed away like it had teeth. He didn't speak, not to Emma, not to his children. He wandered the garden like a man tracking invisible steps. Then, late that night, he locked the study door and lit the oil lamp. The letter lay in the center of his desk like a loaded pistol. He stared at it for hours. Wallace could publish first. That would be easier, cleaner. The world would hear the truth, but not from him. He could stay buried in his books. Let someone else take the blast. But no. Wallace hadn't bled for it, hadn't lived inside it, hadn't measured skulls in silence for 20 years, hadn't watched his daughter die under a sky that never blinked. He hadn't carried this idea like a tumor in the soul. And Darwin knew, if this idea entered the world without gravity, it would be misunderstood, dismissed, twisted into something neat, something digestible. It deserved better than that, even if it destroyed him. He stood, took the letter, held it over the fireplace. It caught flame fast. He watched it curl, blacken, vanish. Then he turned, walked to his desk, and opened the drawer. Inside, the notebooks. Years of ink, of equations, of horror. His whole damn life on thin paper. He pulled one out, opened it, breathed in, and began. He didn't write like a scientist. He wrote like a man trying to get something out of his body before it killed him. No flourishes, no rage, just evidence, lined up like scalpels. The Origin of Species wasn't a book. It was an autopsy, cold, clinical, relentless. He didn't insult God, but he wasn't invited. He didn't scream. He described. Nature was not a mother. It was a furnace. Species did not appear, perfect and frozen. They shifted, split, failed. Most died. A few bent. A few survived. Not because they were better, but because they were lucky. Timed right. Shaped just so. He gave the world a law with no mercy. No cosmic judge. Just process. Extinction wasn't punishment. Success wasn't reward. It was filtration. He didn't gloat. He didn't defend. He simply opened the curtain and let the machinery show itself. And when he finished, 3 months later, his hands were shaking. Because he knew. This wasn't just a theory. This was a fuse. And when the flame touched it, when the first reader turned the first page, it would light something no one could ever blow out. He didn't sleep that night. The manuscript sat on the desk, still, silent, loaded. He stepped back, closed his eyes, and whispered to no one. So be it. The book didn't land. It detonated. No press tour, no interviews, just a single drop into the bloodstream of Victorian England on the Origin of Species. It looked harmless, pale cover, modest size, academic tone. But the moment it hit the shelves, the air changed. Readers didn't finish chapters. They slammed the book shut, hands trembling. Some whispered, some shouted. But none could pretend the world was the same. The church screamed first. Within a week, pulpits flared like gunpowder. Sunday sermons became courtroom indictments. A man has tried to replace the hand of God with the paw of the beast. If this book is true, then morality itself is an illusion. Darwin says you are not sacred. You are random. He wasn't debated. He was exorcised, cast in fire and shadow. To question Darwin was piety. To burn him in effigy, righteousness. The cartoons followed. London newspapers ran his face on the body of a chimpanzee, feet swinging from a branch. Punch magazine labeled him King, Monkey. Another sketch showed him dissecting the Bible with a scalpel labeled Logic. One illustration had him in a cage at the zoo, half man, half beast, while children laughed and threw peanuts. They didn't ridicule the theory. They ridiculed him, because it was easier to laugh than to look in the mirror. The upper class panicked quietly. Members of Parliament passed the book like pornography. One bishop reportedly tore it in half. Cambridge faculty declared it dangerous conjecture masquerading as science. But behind closed doors, they kept reading. Darwin had said the unspeakable, not that humans were animals, but that animals survived the same way we did. That evolution didn't elevate, it filtered. That no one, not lions, not lords, was born chosen. And the panic wasn't just intellectual, it was existential. One newspaper shrieked, "If Darwin is right, then man is not fallen from heaven. He has clawed his way up from filth." But the backlash that bled deepest didn't come from the public. It came from home. Emma said nothing for days. She read the book in silence, closed it, placed it on the table like it was radioactive. That night she went to bed without a word. Darwin stood at the door, hand on the frame. He didn't follow. The children heard whispers at school, jokes, murmurs. One of them came home and asked, "Father, are we really from monkeys?" He smiled, softly, and said, "We are from survivors." After that, they stopped asking. The house quieted. Not in peace, in distance. Like something invisible had moved in. Something cold. Something sacred that had died. But no one was allowed to mention it. One afternoon, Darwin walked into town. It was drizzling. He pulled his hat low, tried to stay unnoticed. A man passed him, mid-30s, hat, coat, scarf. As they crossed paths, the man leaned to a companion and muttered, just loud enough, "That's him, the ape man." Darwin didn't stop, didn't look back, but the words cut deeper than any review. Walked home slower that day, fingers cold, ears burning. Back at his desk, he opened the newspaper, folded it to the editorial. "Mr. Darwin has not written a book. He has unleashed a plague." He folded it again, didn't respond. He never answered the critiques, never joined the debates. When invited to defend himself, he declined. His colleagues were outraged on his behalf. But Darwin, he knew better. He had already said everything worth saying. He had peeled the world open, had shown the gears. And once you've done the autopsy, there's no point arguing with the corpse. Let them shout. He'd handed them the scalpel. What they did with it, that was their story now. So he returned to the garden, watched the pigeons, listened to the silence in his house, and waited for the dust to settle. If it ever would. She died quietly. Mary Eleanor Darwin, his second daughter, just a few weeks old. She hadn't yet smiled, hadn't spoken, hadn't even seen a spring. But death didn't wait for meaning. Another coffin, smaller than the last. Another hole in the garden. Another morning where silence hit louder than grief. By now, Darwin didn't ask why. He had no interest in comfort theology, no need to wrestle with divine intention. That rope had snapped with Annie, with the long, slow rot of watching belief die in your child's room. He didn't believe in punishment anymore, or trials, or meaning hidden in suffering. Pain was just static, a byproduct of nerves firing inside meat, the shriek of a brain that thought it mattered. He didn't weep, didn't pray, didn't look up. He folded in, a little smaller, a little quieter, and turned back to the only thing that didn't lie to him, the page. His study became a trench, books stacked like barricades, diagrams pinned to walls with rusting tacks, notes scrawled in, every margin, journals filled not with theories, but with symptoms, dozens of notebooks, pain behind the eyes, spasms after breakfast, sweat during sleep, shortness of breath when waking, a rash on the arms, never explained. He logged them like an explorer charting enemy territory, trying to map the decay, trying to fight a system that didn't fight back. And still, he wrote, crossed out paragraphs, ripped pages in half, scribbled thoughts, then slashed through them, sometimes with ink, sometimes with a knife. Friends said he looked hollow, not ill, abandoned, like something had left him, and he hadn't bothered to fill the space. He stopped accepting invitations, turned down every lecture, declined every medal. He even refused the offer of a knighthood. He didn't want honor. He wanted silence, because he didn't want to argue with a world that hadn't listened when it mattered. He spent his days in the garden, studying worms, breeding pigeons, watching ants dismantle dead things. And, sometimes, very late at night, he would open On the Origin of Species again, read it slowly, and not recognize the voice inside. It wasn't regret, not exactly, but there were moments, on the quietest evenings, when he stared at the book like a stranger had written it. A stranger who had torn open the sky and then left him in the ash. He'd wonder, was it worth it? Had he really changed the world, or had he just rearranged the wreckage? Because the world kept going. People still clung to myths, still prayed, still built cathedrals over graves and called it hope. His truth had bled into the bones of science, but the heart of society beat the same. And some nights, he'd whisper to the dark, "What if I just turned my pain into math?" No one answered. On his last day, he barely spoke. He sat in his chair, surrounded by diagrams, old letters, half-finished ideas. The fire crackled. The air was still. He opened his journal, wrote one sentence. No flourish, no conclusion. Just a line. Trembling, from the weight of decades. There is no peace in understanding. Then the pen slipped from his hand, and he was gone. They buried him in Westminster Abbey, beside Isaac Newton, a final irony. The man who unseated God laid beside the one who revealed his universe. England placed flowers, read eulogies, etched his name in stone. But Darwin hadn't asked for legacy. He had asked for truth, and it had cost him more than anyone would ever understand. Because once he saw the world as it truly was, he could never make it home again. Darwin died. But the idea didn't. It leaked out of his grave like gas and drifted into every room of human thought. Slowly at first, then violently, silently, irrevocably. At the Royal Society, it rewrote biology. Textbooks burst open like lungs filling with cold air. Scientists stopped searching for perfect forms and started tracking mutations. Evolution wasn't a theory anymore. It was the software running under every cell, every species, every failure. Medicine followed. No longer about balance or humors. Now it was survival tech. Antibiotics, vaccines, gene therapy. All designed to stay one mutation ahead of the bacteria, the cancer, the collapse. Adapt or die, in petri dishes. Psychology caught the scent next. Freud's couch was built on instincts Darwin whispered into the world. Reproduction, dominance, fear, desire, all primate inheritance. The unconscious wasn't mystical. It was an old beast with newer furniture. Sociology snapped next. Class struggle, resource competition, group dynamics, territory, altruism with cost-benefit calculus behind it. Suddenly, kindness wasn't divine. It was strategic, but it didn't stop at science. It got into business. The marketplace became a jungle. CEOs quoted Origin in boardrooms. Survival of the fittest turned into survival of the fastest, the most adaptable. Kodak died. Netflix lived. Uber ate taxis alive. Amazon mutated faster than brick and mortar could breathe. Darwin became the ghostwriter of capitalism. Then politics. Policy turned predatory. Governments talked about fitness for welfare, stronger nations, the will to compete. The concept bent, got misused, twisted into eugenics, into fascism, into nightmares Darwin never wanted to see. The knife he built wasn't moral. It cut wherever it landed. Even algorithms evolved. Machine learning, neural nets, natural selection recoded in silicon. The weak models fail. The strong replicate. Chatbots adapt in real time. Software doesn't improve by design. It iterates, bleeds, rewrites. Darwin was dead. But the machine he described was very much alive. It was running everything. Because his idea didn't just answer, "Where did we come from?" It whispered something worse. Where you're going depends on whether you can keep up. And beneath all the data, all the applications, all the modern praise, there was still that one awful silence. No goal, no finish line, no chosen people, just a race with no referee. Evolution didn't make things better. It just made them fit, for now, until the environment changed again. And here's the deepest cut. Darwin didn't want worship. He wasn't building a new cathedral. He was tearing the old one down, brick by brick, because it was full of lies. And what was left when the dust cleared? You. No script, no guide, no pre-written meaning in your blood. Just pressure, just consequence, just the terrifying truth that everything you are is either passed on or ends with you. And that's freedom. Not the kind that makes you cheer, the kind that makes you tremble. Because now you know. You don't matter because you were made. You matter if you survive, if you adapt, if you choose to carry something forward, an idea, a mind, a mutation. Darwin didn't make the world colder. He just wiped the steam off the glass and let us see the gears underneath. And they're still turning. Darwin didn't kill God. He just stopped pretending, stopped forcing meaning onto pain like a child trying to glue wings onto a corpse and call it an angel. Stopped whispering, "Everything happens for a reason," while watching his daughter die with nothing but silence in return. He didn't destroy the script. He just admitted there wasn't one. And that takes more guts than worship ever did. He looked the chaos in the eye and wrote it down. And in doing so, he gave us something that most of history was too scared to touch. A mirror that didn't flatter, a map without destinations, a world that doesn't care, and still somehow demands that you do. He didn't shout. He didn't gather crowds. He didn't build a movement. He just wrote. And from that quiet defiance, the lessons came. Lesson 1. Truth won't hug you. Some truths don't heal. Some truths gut. They leave you blinking, breathless, half-collapsed. But they're still yours. And when you stop pretending the world is soft, you can finally start living in it with your eyes open. Most people won't. Most people flinch. They call truth negativity. They call questioning arrogance. They smile through storms and pray the ship isn't sinking. But Darwin stood on the deck and said, "We're leaking. And here's how." Lesson 2. You're not chosen. You're what's left. You are not the crown of anything. You're the residue of survival, a ghost of chance, a fluke with language. Your ancestors didn't conquer. They didn't die. That's it. There's no cosmic plan, no mission. And that's not depressing. That's liberation. Because it means you don't owe the sky anything. You get to make the meaning. You get to decide what this flash of existence gets spent on. That's power. Scary power. The kind that burns your hands if you hold it wrong. But still, yours. Lesson 3. Most people lie, even to themselves. Darwin didn't, and it ruined him. He paid, in stomach acid, in nightmares, in cold beds and colder stares. He lost peace, lost comfort. But he never lost clarity, because truth is expensive, not because it's hidden, but because it hurts, and pain makes people blink. History is full of those who looked away, scientists who softened the edges, who added maybe where it didn't belong, who said what the funders wanted, who feared the mob more than the mirror. Darwin didn't flinch. He wrote the mirror, then sat back and let it wreck the room. Even now, the world resists. Teachers dilute, politicians distort, churches twist, social media buries it under noise. But the truth's still sitting there, like a stone in your shoe, like a low hum in your skull that never shuts up. It says, no one's in charge. It says everything changes. It says, the rules are pressure, time, and teeth. So what do? You keep going. You carry it like fire. Because if you can stand up in a world without explanations and still choose to love, to build, to care, then you are not weak. You are not lost. You're something stronger. You're honest, Now you know. You weren't sculpted. You weren't summoned. You weren't sent. You were sifted. Through bloodlines, through luck, through teeth and cold and plague and war and heartbreak. You're not divine. You're leftover. You are the statistical accident that didn't die. You are not chosen. You are what remains. And yet, you're here. A mutation that crawled far enough to look in the mirror and ask questions the universe doesn't answer. That's your curse. And that's your edge. Because you carry a brain built by panic and hunger and silence. But inside it, somehow, is something new. The ability to look at the system and step outside it. To look at yourself and ask what now. Darwin didn't hand you comfort. He handed you a burning fuse and walked away. He gave you freedom, not the heroic kind, the kind that keeps you up at night, because now it's your move. There is no God to impress, no fate to fulfill, no prophecy to unlock. There's just this, a bag of bones, a ticking clock, and a mind that knows it's temporary. So what are you going to do with that? You can spend your life trying to feel special, trying to glue golden stories onto a world that never promised you anything. You can look to the sky, scream into the dark, beg for someone to say, "You matter." Or you can stop waiting. You can stop outsourcing your meaning. You can choose to love, to build, to learn, to fall, to rise, to live, not because someone told you to, but because you can. That's the gift, and that's the weight. Darwin didn't write the final chapter. He just kicked the door open and said, "There's no throne. There's just ground. Stand on it." You are not an echo of design. You are a crack in the pattern, a species that can rewrite the rules. You are not a cog in a machine. You are the machine waking up. So now what? Will you crawl? Will you repeat? Will you consume and numb and die safe? Or will you do what nothing else has? Create meaning from noise. Make light without a sun. Become more than just what survived. Because here's the final truth. No one's watching. No one's guiding. There is no script. Only silence. And one voice in it. Yours. So ask yourself clearly, right now. If no one ever tells you why you exist, will you still choose to live like it matters?